Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Brown, and welcome to the Direct Private Investment Show. Today, we're going to be talking about Carofin Investment that's put over $1.2 billion into private placements over the last, how many years, Bruce?
It's called 27 years.
27 years. Fantastic. You see what I'm saying? Right. So, so Bruce, this is all about really the Carofin and what you guys have been up to over the last 27 years.
Right.
But where does the story start? Like, walk us back to
Sure.
the beginning.
Yeah. A long time ago, I was living the dream in New York City as a young investment banker working for one of the major firms. And this is back in the day when you basically had 6 firms that we used to call the special bracket. Yeah. And that would include some names you know of now, like a Goldman Sachs, and like a Morgan Stanley, and then firms you wouldn't know today, like a First Boston, Lehman Brothers, Solomon Brothers, et cetera. These firms have generally merged into larger commercial banks, actually, as U.S. investment banks have become universal banks, much like Europe. And this happened largely as Glass-Steagall evaporated. So without getting into a history lesson here, so I say we used to have a very clear division between securities and commercial banking. That doesn't exist, hasn't existed for quite a while. And I actually came out of the Navy and went into an investment banking. I was in Naval Special Warfare SEAL team. And what I liked about investment banking was, frankly, the people. They had the same sort of moxie that I was seeing in the teams. And so when I started meeting people on the street in the 80s, I said, okay, this is a place for me. And ultimately managed to land a job at First Boston. Was there 8 years, had a good run. It was all international work. And my wife had gone through a medical condition that was a cancer condition for about 6 years. And we had one child at that time. She managed to use natural healing techniques and came out of that still able to have children. And we kept having babies again. And basically, it was time to get a life. Loved investment banking, loved the international, didn't love leaving my family crying in the driveway on a Friday night as I was going to some other part of the world. And so we started plotting a process to find a place that we want to raise our family. And for us, that was Western North Carolina. So it was kind of this odd situation where I was bringing a New York mentality of investment banking to a town of 7,000 people. And I actually had a little bit different business model in the early days, but I started getting calls from friends who were this type of investor I'd never heard of before called an angel investor. And in 1995 and 6, that was a pretty new concept. We didn't have Shark Tank back then, and we didn't have incubators back then. What you had is individuals who took some of their wealth and would make early stage, make investments in companies, not so dissimilar to what they do today. And frankly, not so dissimilar in the sense that it was kind of rough and tumble, not a lot of experience, not a lot of process and formality to how you do it. And frankly, that's what we're trying to do day in, day out with Carofin, is to take this, probably the least efficient part of the capital markets, the private investment world, and put sort of some guardrails around it, some process around it, so that you can complete transactions more efficiently, so that the investor gets a better experience, so the issuer has a higher probability of getting funded. But back in the 90s, it also happened to be the time of .com, before .com became .bomb. And we also had telecom build-outs. You had life science things happening. Venture funds were really kind of coming into their own at that period. And so right time, right place. And we started doing a lot of this work. And I have to say, the venture work that we did in those early days, which we still do a fair amount of venture today, serves you well in looking at almost any company. Because, is the business model really a sound one? Do they have a real good grasp of who their customer is? Who are the people you're dealing with? Which is frankly what I like about this business is I'm an entrepreneur. I started numerous companies, including Carofin. I can relate to our clients. It's a 24/7 kind of a deal. You go to sleep with it, you wake up with it. Many people say, gosh, how could you be a Navy SEAL? And, the answer is pretty simple. Just don't quit. It also helps if you can swim pretty well and, take a little bit of pain. But in the Navy, in that kind of environment, and you could say the same for professional athletics, for example, it's pretty episodic. You're faced with a challenge, and either you meet that challenge, or on a given day you don't, unless somebody's trying to kill you. Normally there's another day to take another crack at it, Um, in business, I've got so much respect for entrepreneurs because you wear that 24/7. And when it's not going well, it's going to be with you until you fix it. And, one of the things about, being in the SEALs is, you can't, quitting doesn't work. And often is not in business, you find that, failure is really not an option, and you need to find a way to succeed. We're looking for those kind of entrepreneurs, and I enjoy, frankly, being around those kind of people.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Bruce. So you covered the origin story to Carofin. So how did you get from there to today?
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, when somebody finds out that you're someone who has some ability to raise capital for them, there's virtually an unlimited number of young companies that need capital to grow. And in fact, you could argue it's harder in some ways today than it's ever been, because back in the day, you would go to your local bank. You may have a relationship with that branch manager. That branch manager would have some underwriting ability, and they might make you a loan, based on the classic 3 C's of credit, which are creditworthiness, collateral, and character. Well, today, with the consolidation of banking we've had, a commercial bank locally is not going to make you a loan to start a business. It just doesn't happen. So on the one hand, a traditional source of capital from banking is gone. And they're not going to make you those loans because they've consolidated. Underwriting is probably 100 or 1,000 miles away. It doesn't happen anymore in any meaningful amount, unless you happen to have a lot of cash collateral, unless you have a lot of real estate, in which case they might make you a loan. On the other hand, you've got the venture capital world. Well, venture capital is still pretty well, the fund structure is relatively new in history, but they tend to be on the West Coast, around the Bay Area. They tend to be, Boston, New York. That leaves a lot of the country that has good business plans that you can get behind, smart people, hardworking people, but, local sources of capital, even here in North Carolina, where you've got a very developed Research Triangle Park, on a relative basis is quite scarce, right? So I started getting calls from friends who were angel investors. They needed capital. Frankly, I'd moved here and I needed to find a way of feeding my family. So it seemed like a logical thing to do, to take on those assignments. And out of that, a practice developed. One of the first things you figure out is, yes, you do need to be a broker-dealer, registered effectively with the SEC, but through an organization called FINRA, to legally raise capital for third parties. So in 1997, we created a broker-dealer. And from then, we were a bit of a rocket ship until we weren't a rocket ship. We financed a lot of the .com. 2000 was a tough year for anything with a dot on it. And then we frankly struggled along. But today, to fast forward, it's a much more diversified business where we're still working with the small to medium business community. And to put that in perspective, something like 90+% of the employees in the country are working for small to medium businesses. That's probably a growing percentage. And something like 60% of the U.S. economy is supported by the small to medium business. But the investment banking world is really not set up to finance the small to medium business. The deals are too small. The expertise, frankly, it's just a different expertise that we've evolved over the last 27 years. They don't have it. I didn't have it when I moved here. I've learned it on the job. Now through things like this series, we're trying to formalize some of those lessons learned so that we can share, what's working for us as we select transactions, underwrite transactions, and try to mitigate risk along the way. So, one of the hidden benefits of our business is we do sell directly to individuals, and often it's not the same person that would participate as an investor in one of our deals has done investments away from us. And often it's not those companies are going to need capital at some point. And it's a logical connection where the same parties that we would sell a security to actually are our best source of referrals for transactions. And that's always a good referral because ultimately, while the business plan has to work, it's going to be the people that make it successful, and getting that personal referral to the entrepreneur from someone who's already invested in their company, as you can imagine, is a really valuable referral.
I can imagine so, for sure, for sure. Cool, Bruce. So very curious to know, what exactly do you do in a day? What does 24 hours look like? And if you could, for our viewers around the world, just touch on like, what kind of hats do you wear and how have those hats evolved over the years?
Um, you know, I've been fortunate. I've always been in leadership positions throughout my life. As a Boy Scout, in the Navy, obviously I was a naval officer. And one of the things that I think also drew me to investment banking is you've got a lot of players around a transaction. You've got a company that is an issuer. You might have attorneys that are involving legal support. You might have accountants that are providing financial support. Obviously, you've got investors. And somebody's got to play a coordinating role. And I would argue it's a leadership role in getting a deal done. And that has been, that's sort of endemic to investment banking broadly. And it's been something that was always appealing to me. As it relates to Carofin and leadership, kind of a quick story. Years ago, well, when I was going through my basic training in SEALs, which people know as BUDS, in Coronado, there's actually a famous TED Talk done by Admiral McRaven, where he's giving the commencement. It wasn't a TED Talk; it was a commencement address at the University of Texas, and he's talking about different elements of SEAL training, and he's bringing that to life. Well, one he talks about is how if you're in a training exercise and you're falling behind, the instructors will pick you off and they'll make you a sugar cookie. And what a sugar cookie means is, at this point, you're in dungarees. They take you to the beach. They drop you on the beach. They roll you around. It gets you wet. They roll you around the sand, and then you work out for another hour and a half or two. And of course, you're all covered with sand, so you're chaffing up, and they're making it harder. And basically, they're trying to make sure, do you really want this or not, or can you take the pain? Basically, well, I was doing one of those events once, and everybody has a bad day, right? And so I was never the fastest runner. I was a swimmer, but wasn't the fastest runner. And I was drifting off. It just wasn't my day. And I'm trudging along, and I'm dangerously close to being, in the sugar cookie world. And this little voice, wasn't so little, actually kind of whispers in my ear. I was an officer, again, amongst a group of enlisted men, some other junior officers, but I'm supposed to be a leader here, right? And this little voice said, "You can't lead from the rear, sir." Truer words were never spoken to me. It stayed with me my whole life. And I think part of my role is to lead, is to set an example. And that's a 24/7 deal. And that's really the role of any entrepreneur is, you've got to lead your company, and that company is going to follow your personality. Having said that, I happen to be a career investment banker, so I've got skill sets. I've evolved those skill sets to corporate finance appropriate to this market. But, we built a team here, and like SEAL team, the different people in our team have different strengths and different roles. And my job is to identify those, create an environment where those roles are very clear, and then bring people into our team who are exceptional in their role. Everybody can't be good at everything, but that's kind of my job and probably like any entrepreneur, what I'm also trying to do is creating an environment where I'm obsolete, where the organization and the strengths of the organization and the justification of the organization, perpetuate me personally. And happily, having done this for 27 years now, I think we're getting a sense of that. We've got a terrific team, right person in the right job, doing the right thing. And so that's largely where I come in.
Amazing. I totally hear you about leadership. I think leadership, and I didn't know you were in the SEAL, so that's pretty cool. I always have this fantasy about one day, signing up for BUDS just to experience it, because I like also suffering on being an entrepreneur myself, which from my experience is also largely about suffering. But in the context of leadership, you're not only leading your people, but you're leading investors too, and you're leading issuers. And those are the three stakeholders that, you kind of sit in the middle, right? You're sitting in this kind of the jam in the middle of the donuts, if you like. And so I'm curious to ask you, because you have to lead different types of stakeholders, investors, your people, and issuers, or business owners you're giving away either debt or equity in private placements, what is the single most important quality you believe in your experience in terms of a leader? What is the number one quality that you feel, or skill that you feel as a leader is necessary to lead a company like Carofin, an investment bank like Carofin, for so long. You know what I mean? Like this, we've gone through pandemics, we've gone through stock market crashes, and Carofin survived it all and thrived through it all.
Right.
So with all that said, what would you put it down to? What makes you such a successful captain of the Carofin ship, if you like?
Well, no brain, no pain.
And on that one, that's time in.
No, look, it's you have to have a pretty high pain threshold, right? Because you get thrown a lot of curveballs. And when you look at successful entrepreneurs, and look, we've had some tough spots, right? I mean, the 2000 crash completely obliterated our business model, right? COVID was no walk in the park, right? You can't get people in the same room, you can't get on a plane. But I think you do have to have an attitude that failure is not an option. I would also say, and this is kind of on the personal level, don't make a hard decision late in the day when you're tired. You always come back every day in a stronger setting if you got a reasonable amount of sleep, to be more clear-headed and to find alternative ways to go. I do think your physical health is incredibly important. It's a mind, body, spirit thing. And you need that balance of all three. And we're always struggling to maintain that balance without getting too wish-woo on you here. I mean, I just personally think it's a practical reality. You can't be all physical. You can't be all mental. And I guess you could be all spiritual, but, you'd be lacking the other two. So, I think also, there's got to be a there. We've spent time recently thinking about, how do we define Carofin? And our tagline, if you will, that we've come to in recent years is meaningful investments, vital capital. And those two, I think, do a pretty good job from the investor's perspective. Yes, we're creating a security to provide you an outsized return that needs to be greater than the public markets because it's got a liquidity, it's got higher risk, but it also needs to be meaningful. What do you want to do with your capital as an investor? And, frankly, I think we're more drawn to investors who have some passion behind the investors themselves and want to get behind whatever the theme is for the business itself. The vital capital part's relatively easy. Virtually any company we finance needs money to accomplish its goals. And often as not, it needs that money yesterday. And so it got to move fairly quickly. But, back to the investors, this is an incredible opportunity where, capital is still scarce, not in the broadest sense, but in terms of directed to this market. And now you're having a market that is, again, very, very inefficient. When you work in New York, as I did, and you were doing, literally, I quit counting at $30 billion, the amount of capital ads raised for major corporations, many of which, you would know of, a Honda or a Sony or a Hilton Hotels. Now, nobody that's around those companies has any memory of what I did 35 years ago. And it's not that I'd like to think not anybody could have done those deals, but I wasn't the only person who could have done them. This world, every company we finance is bringing something unique to society and something we think is meaningful. And we hope the investors would find meaningful when they get behind. I'll give you a specific example.
Please.
We're financing a company. We've already raised a couple $1 million for them that basically has created in a suitcase form faction the ability to sterilize surgical instruments. And they can do it without water and they can do it without electricity. Now, most people wouldn't know, you can't, contrary to what the movies might say, you can't sterilize surgical instruments with hot water or boiling water. It takes a whole other order of magnitude to completely decontaminate them. But they've got this at a prototype level. It's been tested in the military. It gets used in a natural disaster area. And right now we're surrounded by a increasing amount of military requirements and increasing amount of natural disasters, it seems. So, this product will allow you to dramatically extend the footprint of where surgical procedures can be practiced. And many of the deaths that happen, think about, the earthquake we just had in Turkey. I mean, those people that were injured, that weren't killed, how can they be transported? Who knows what condition they're in? If you can triage them on site and do things to stabilize them, that to me is a meaningful investment. And, that's the kind of thing we really like to get behind.
So, Bruce, I'd love to talk about the link between Carofin and the investment community. You mentioned meaningful investments. Investors have choice. They have many investment firms potentially to work with, broker dealers to work with. Why Carofin?
You know, every time I get together with the senior management of our regulator, an organization called FINRA, it's a self-regulatory organization, I'll ask senior management, do you know of another company like us among the 3,500 broker dealers? And for better part of 15 years, the answer's been no. So what has happened in investment banking, like most industries, is you tend to get narrow and deep in terms of the professional qualifications of the people in it. And that makes sense. You want somebody who's a part of this machine you've created, who's very, 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 very knowledgeable about a certain aspect of the capital markets. We have to be generalists. And that makes us a bit of a throwback as investment banking goes. You know, if you went to an investment bank today, someone may know a lot about short-term debt. They may know a lot about mergers and acquisition in a specific industry. You know, they may be equity research. But to go to a banker who could look at a company cold, evaluate what makes that company tick, come to some reasonable expectation of what type of security, financing the entire balance sheet, debt and equity, create an offering document out of that, have some sense of who the investors are that are appropriate for that security, which is a bit of a needle in the haystack, unless you've got a CRM that's got 13,000 investors in it, as we do, and has created the data field so you can do that. So, you know, that's just a really tough thing to assemble, which is why I'm still at it 27 years later.
Congratulations.
Thank you.